the Little Things by Sarah Lawton. Read by Katie Villa. For Josie, always my first reader. Prologue. I watched my daughter die. The days leading up to her death are seared into my memory, like one of those old clicking reels of film, snapshot images flickering behind my eyelids. There, Vivian, looking up at me. There, Alex, wild-eyed and frantic. I'd made the mistake of trusting the wrong person. Again. Never trust anyone. Never trust yourself. Rachel. On the night I first saw Alex, the air was so hot it was almost fetid. It choked my throat and groped at me with damp fingers, slipping under my hair and arms, wrapping my legs, making my skin prickle and itch. I was late for my class. By the time I got to the village hall, most of my sign-ups had arrived. The usual suspects, a motley bunch, probably just there for the company and free biscuits. Jeff was already present, resplendent in his greying toweling robe. He always liked to strut around, whipping up his crowd of admirers. Not that there was much to admire exactly, except perhaps his bravado. He clambered onto the stage and dropped his robe with a flourish, lying back on the chaise. I noticed he had a new varicose vein on his leg, a violent burst of bulbous purple, hot against the milky white of his skin. I filed the observation away for later. The contrast of colour, for use in a painting, maybe. I did not care to look further up, to where he was arranging himself to his liking. A new name had appeared on the list I had pinned up on the village notice board in the hall for that week's class. Alex. I had entertained the thought that he might be a woman, as most of my class were female. But something about the firm and determined cursive told me the hand was male. Whoever it was, they were late and would have to take the last easel, which was directly in the line of sight of Jeff's now spread-eagled legs. The room settled into a hive of subdued activity. Drinks made, biscuits crunched, gossip caught up on. The hissing sound of scratching charcoal moving across parchment. I made my first round, saying nothing, merely observing how shapes were being pulled together. The creamy paper taking the gift of shade, throwing light against dark. I will never tire of watching people create. Mrs. Baxter had positioned herself away from Jeff's business end and was sketching the great bulk of his shoulders, shading the gingery hair that covered them with sharp strokes, making them bristle in a porcine manner. Poor Jeff was an easy target for her tendency to veer into caricature. She caught my attention and nodded towards the other end of the hall. "Not what that one expected, I'll bet." Following her gaze, I saw that the last easel had been occupied by a teenage boy who had slipped in while I wasn't watching. "Do you think he was hoping for some nubile young goddess, throwing her clothes off with abandon?" "Probably," I answered with a grin, trying not to laugh. It wouldn't be the first time, would it? I usually asked sniggering young people to leave, but there was a gravitas about him that gave me pause. He seemed to be made entirely of angles, sharp and new. His shoulders looked as though they were broadening in front of me. A child man. Dark slashes of eyebrows were heavy over startling eyes that glinted like sea glass. I knew they must be extraordinary, if even a hint of their colour shocked me from the small distance between us. His hand skimmed back and forth on the paper with a deftness that spoke of talent. He had a precision and stillness about him that should not belong to the young. His eyes flicked between Jeff and the sketch in front of him, and there was no embarrassment on his face. I imagined I could hear, somehow, the particular sound that the heel of his hand was making as it scuffed the paper, above all the others in the room, and I thought that it might smudge his drawing and bother him, this boy who moved so succinctly. As I moved closer, I could see that his face was rescued from its hard lines by his mouth, which was full, although he pressed it flat now and then with concentration. Suddenly, the very tip of his tongue peeked through, and then sharp white teeth bit down on the edge of his lip. I didn't like the feeling that the flash of pink and those white teeth produced in me. There was something disconcerting about him. He reminded me of someone. It put me on edge, so I turned away to talk to Mrs. Hayward, who was struggling with perspective, as usual. At the end of the class, the dark-haired boy left as silently as he arrived. I readied the easels for the caretaker to store when he came in to lock up. No one worried that something might be stolen, a somewhat complacent mentality in a village where nothing bad ever happened. The last easel was Alex's. He'd left his sketch. It was exceptional. Clever strokes had built up from feather-light shimmers to a crushing, nearly tearing force, giving Jeff an almost majestic appearance. He could have been Zeus, reigning from Olympus, strong-limbed and fierce of face. And yet, here was Jeff in his essence. Portly, no shame, jolly. How had he done this? I could never have captured him like this. Not in an hour. Not ever, perhaps. This boy was special. I took the sketch and rolled it up carefully. Closing the door to the hall behind me, it was a 30-second walk to the Goose and Lavender. As ever, Steve, the landlord, saw me come in and pointed to the table by the door, joining me there with a bottle of wine in an ice bucket and 2 glasses. The night was still warm and the windows were all open. The breeze brought in a smell of warm asphalt and cut grass from the verge. Bill had been out with his strimmer, tidying up the green. He sat down with a huff and squeezed around to settle opposite me. He poured us each a large glass of straw-coloured liquid, condensation forming almost immediately on the sides. Thanks. We lifted our glasses to clink. Cheers. Look at this, I said to him as he sipped his drink. An odd boy came into my class tonight. He's really talented. I smoothed out the paper between us, and he turned it around to face him, studying it for a long moment. Wow. He traced the long line of a leg with a careful fingertip. Who knew I could almost bring myself to fancy Jeff? Don't be mean, I laughed. God, it's so unfair, said Steve, as I pointed out some of the techniques he had used that were quite remarkable for someone his age. Why can't I draw like this? I never made it past stickmen or dogs with 10 legs. Maybe you should actually come to one of my classes then, I replied with a laugh, loosening up the further we got down the bottle, tensions of the day melting away. How old do you think he is? Asked Steve, leaning back in his chair and rolling his head, making his neck click revoltingly. Who, Jeff? Ancient. Ha! No, not Jeff. Your new mystery boy. Oh, I don't know. It's hard to tell sometimes. He's probably a couple of years older than Vivian. 18, maybe? 19? Old enough, then. Old enough for what? You know, there's not a lot of choice in the village. He winked slyly as he said it, a slow droop of one eyelid over a hazel eye. Oh, Steve! I'm old enough to be his mother. Who says I'm talking about you? He leaned back and creased up with laughter. It echoed in the confines of the pub, and several people looked over and grinned themselves. Can we get another bottle? I asked impulsively, still feeling a residue of the disquiet that...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?